Allow me to speak to you this afternoon in very simple English, also because English is not my first language, and you are no children, but I am a simple man, and I speak very simply, so, and I think it is Herbert Vaughan, and what I'm going to speak about, I think would like it in a very simple way, that we speak about the priesthood, spiritual motherhood. And so allow me to go this afternoon for half an hour to the 19th century Victorian England, which is a beautiful period of history that I love, because we'll find the three cardinals and great leaders of the Catholic revival here in England who produced seminal works on the priesthood. And I think these works could be ranked, could be considered as jewels and classics of Western spirituality and theology. And it is, of course, in the first place, St. John Henry Newman, who wrote a number of sermons on the triple office of Christ, or from his Catholic period. There is a worth reading. Maybe you mentioned it here. I was not able to follow all your conferences, for which I am really very sorry. You may have mentioned it, his beautiful Catholic sermon, Priests, Men, not angels, the priests of the gospel, which is in his discourses addressed to mixed congregations, really was reading. Or you have the Henry Edward Manning, who authored a book called The Eternal Priesthood, and of course then Herbert Vaughan. And since much ink has been spilled on Newman, also on Manning in especially research papers, but actually very little on Herbert Vaughan, allow me to focus in this presentation on this unique personality of the English Catholicism. Unlike Newman and Manning and Faber or Ignatius Spencer, do you know Ignatius Spencer? The English know him, you should, very good. He was not a convert, but came from an old aristocratic family and represents, I would say, again, the most noble element of the traditional English Catholicism. During the persecution of Catholics here in England, his ancestors were exposed to much privation and suffering due to their fidelity to the Church of Rome, and their family house at Courtfield was one of the places which they held in possession, I think since the 16th century, was one of the places where priests celebrated Holy Mass in secret. Why Herbert Vaughan this afternoon and today? I would say simply, first of all, because the priesthood and the formation of priests was something that was very close to his heart. And that's the main reason why he's on the agenda today. What show at least some of the following facts that how the priesthood was so important to him. Shortly after his ordination, he visited as a young priest various colleges and seminaries on the continent. In Germany, he spoke very good German, French, etc. Italian, he studied in Italy. Again, information about the training of priests, which he was entrusted with as vice president at St. Edmund's College here in England, which was one of the places for the education of priests. The English know it. And he held in great esteem especially the French seminar, famous French seminar of Saint-Sulpice, founded by Jean-Jacques Gollier in 1641. And his plan, his idea was actually to introduce the Sulpician, we spoke about it this morning, Sulpician spirituality into England, but he wanted to develop it according to the needs of the English people and seminarians. As he himself said, let us transplant the Sulpician or German plan to England. He meant German college in Rome by this, with enough earth to keep it alive, but then let it be planted in English soil and develop according to the genius of the country. Such was Newman's work in bringing the Roman oratory to England. Therefore, it is reasonable to assume that the French school of theology spirituality was also one of the main sources of insights on the priesthood that the Cardinal later elaborated in his major theological work. Later on, he used his experience about the formation of priests for the foundation of the famous Society of Mill Hill Missionaries of St. Joseph, who were trained to be sent to foreign missions in America, Africa. I don't know about Slovakia, but okay. However, the culminating point of his engagement for the priesthood was, of course, the construction of the Westminster Cathedral. By that is not meant, if there are Americans and they don't know, by that is not meant the Westminster Abbey, but the Neo-Byzantine Catholic Cathedral. And his biographer and close relative, John George Sneed Cox, he wrote great classic 2-volume biography on Vaughan, and he says that what was his plan regarding the cathedral? Very beautiful. He wanted a cathedral which should be the head and the heart of the life of the church in England and the vivifying center of its spirit and worship, the home of a companionship of priests, the example of whose life should color all the ideals and activities of the diocese, a splendid and fitting shrine for the sacred liturgy. Therefore, it's actually fitting that he passed away on the feast day of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, the 19th of June, 1903, and the Requiem Mass celebrated for the Cardinal actually coincided with the formal opening of the cathedral. There was no other after that, which is very nice. However, for our purposes, the most important thing is that he left us almost as a testament, a little book on the priesthood. The young priest, sorry, I don't want to be daring, but read it. It's beautiful. From the 19th century, I know. But anyway, the young priest, conferences on the apostolic life, which he was working on, especially in the last years of his life when he was already stricken down by disease. And it was published only and finished posthumously by his youngest brother, Bishop John Vaughan. And I do not want to go through all the chapters, of course. Allow me to highlight only the main 4 theological themes which I find most important in this beautiful book. So let's roll on to the first, predestination of Christ and Mary in view of the priesthood. Cardinal Vaughan, you see, was above all a practical man, a spiritual man, a saintly man. His biographer and cousin, Sir George Sneed Cox, he said, after his death, no skeletons were discovered in his wardrobe, which is quite a rarity these days. And he himself admits, I am not a scholar, I am not a theologian, writing to the Pope on his nomination as cardinal to choose somebody else to be the Archbishop Primate of England, saying to him, I am not a scholar, I'm not a theologian, find somebody else. And yet, of course, he was well acquainted with theology and a doctorate in theology, and was able to express the deepest theological truth with a simple language, which is also quite rare. And a demonstration of this ability is the following meditation on the priesthood, which is just fantastic. And I do not want to describe it, I want to read it in his own words. Because it was pointed out a couple of times, the leitmotif, and which is true, of the history of salvation, the priesthood, starting with Adam, Adamitic priesthood, culminating in a book of Revelation. The question is, does it start here with Adam or somewhere else? And Herbert Vaughan explains where the idea of the priesthood started at all, not in history, as we know it, but somewhere else, in the foreknowing counsel of God. And it's just so beautiful, the text. The first of all God's works in the order of dignity and excellence was the incarnation of the Word. It took first rank among the complacencies of the ever-blessed Trinity. There lay in the bosom of God from eternity the vision of the incarnate Son and His blessed Mother, an object of divine contemplation and delight before ages. And now, and clothed in what office, marked with what character did the Son of Mary appear? A priest standing between the Creator and His creation, called by Tertullian the Catholicus Patris Sacerdos, a priest offering a sacrifice of adoration and thanksgiving, absolutely worthy of the Eternal Father, a priest offering for a guilty world in his own blood a sacrifice of atonement and of prayer, an eternal priest, an eternal victim, each of infinite worth. Such was the vision, and such by divine dispensation was the Son of Mary. The Cardinal doesn't cite, quote, any source that may have served as inspiration for this really explosive, complex text. It's not difficult, though, to reconstruct this Genesis, because the predestination, as the Franciscans especially know, the Scottish tradition, the predestination of Jesus and Mary is something that's been, so to say, always taught by the tradition of the Church, more or less. But it is about all the French school of theology and spirituality, where this idea of their predestination, as far as I know, is linked explicitly to the priesthood. In what sense? That God from all eternity chose to send His Son as new and definitive high priest into the world through Mary. And in this context, we can mention, for example, Charles de Condren's work. Charles de Condren was the first successor of Pierre de Bérulle in French oratory. And his work, where you find this link so mentioned and elaborated, his work, Idée de Sacrifice, the Sacrifice de Jésus-Christ, put together by his disciples in the 17th century. Or Oswald van den Berg's work, Marie et le Sacerdoce, published in 1872, where the author, under the impact of the spirituality of Marie de Martini, says, for example, that Mary was in the foreknowing counsel of God, elected from all eternity to cooperate with Jesus as the high priest in the work of our redemption. Now it is interesting that Vaughan knew Van Berg very well, who at the time served as rector of the Grand Seminar in Bruges. And in his book, The Young Priest even recommends to his readers one of his writings on the priesthood. So French school, the context of the French school is definitely the background. And yet Cardinal Vaughan's merit, I would say, lies in the fact that he brilliantly condensed all these aspects in one short text. Predestination of Jesus and Mary, priesthood, in view of the priesthood, incarnation, redemption, tried in one short text to put all this together. Moreover, and this is characteristic of him, that from these high theological truths, he draws conclusions, very concrete and pastoral, for ministerial priests. So he uses almost an identical language to define the role of the ministerial priest, when he explains that Jesus Christ, the high priest, stands between the Creator and the creation. So, quote, the priest as his chosen instrument stand between God and the people, offering the one sacrifice. And there is a beautiful text where he explains that the priest almost assumes cosmic dimensions, above all when he's about to celebrate the holy sacrifice in persona Christi. Again, something so beautiful. With these thoughts, proceed to west for Mass. You stand in an altar in the midst of the universe, the very central point of the hopes and happiness of men and angels. All the nations and tribes in utter helplessness gather around the sacrifice of the Lamb that you are about to offer, pro omnibus circumstantibus pro vivis atque defunctis. With what awe and devotion will you not now proceed to the altar, to stand with Christ between God and the human race? So the vision of Christ as heavenly eternal priest in the bosom of the triune God, of course, leads to the idea that priesthood, ministerial priesthood, Christ's priesthood, first of all, ministerial priesthood, and your priesthood has its deepest roots in the mystery of the Holy Trinity. And again, it's a link between these two mysteries, priesthood and Trinity. It is something that was every now and then touched upon by the church fathers who play with this connection, relationship, like, for example, my favorite church father, Maximus de Becena, who says that the true priesthood is type in all respect of the blessed divinity, by which he means that the 3 degrees of the Holy Order are like an image of the 3 persons of the Holy Trinity. Now, Cardinal Vaughan devotes an entire chapter to the mystery of the Holy Trinity in order to emphasize the Trinitarian dimension of the priesthood. And there is an interesting passage in his book, which resembles very much what Saint Louis-Marie Grignon de Montfort says about Mary's relationship to the 3 divine persons of the Holy Trinity. You all know the text in his treatise on the true devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, which, by the way, Vaughan recommends, especially to young priests, to meditate upon a lot. He says, read it, especially some important passages from the treatise again and again. Meditate upon it. And you know all the text where Grignon says that Mary has a special relationship with the Father, with the Son, with the Holy Spirit. Now, I do not want to go through the text. What Herbert Vaughan now does, so it seems, is that he takes up this text and makes a little change. He puts a priest in Mary's place and says, you as a priest also enter through your ministry into a special relationship with each divine person of the Holy Trinity. And thus you become a Trinitarian man yourself. And again, a very beautiful text from him. The priest by his office enters into a threefold relationship with the Blessed Trinity. The Father shares with him his paternity by using the priest to give a sacramental being to his divine Son. The Son gives to the priest not only the efficient power of his own word, but also himself. He unites himself to the priest in order to work in him and by him as the means whereby he bestows himself and his sacramental life upon the faithful. The Holy Ghost bestows upon him a superabundance of gifts and graces in order that he may be able to detach souls from the world, to enlighten, guide, and fill them with the love of God. An interesting parallel, I would say, between Grignon, again the French school of theology, and Herbert Vaughan. And for this reason, I would say Herbert Vaughan can be regarded as one of the forerunners of the modern sensibilisation to the Trinitarian basis of the priesthood, which, in any case, was, for example, touched upon by John Paul II in his apostolic exhortation Pastore Dabo Vobis, where he says the famous words, the priesthood arises from the depths, all of our priesthood, Jesus' priesthood, our ministerial priesthood, your priesthood as a father of the family. It arises from the depths of the ineffable mystery of God, that is from the love of the Father, the grace of Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit's gift of unity. Okay, when theologians, I don't know if you discussed it here, because I was not here and I'm very sorry for this, but normally when theologians discuss the priesthood of Jesus, every now and then this question arises, so when did Jesus become high priest? Was it only during his passion, death, resurrection, or only with his glorious ascension into heaven? Or did his priesthood originate already with his coming into the world? That is, with his incarnation. Because you see, at least as far as I know, the letter to the Hebrews is not very clear on this point. But I would say that, yeah, the priesthood of Jesus was, of course, realized in a definitive way in his Paschal mystery. And yet, it is also clear that the spirit of sacrifice as priestly attitude characterizes his entire earthly existence. There was never a moment where he wouldn't act as a priest and offer himself up to the Father on our behalf. And therefore, one has to say, since the incarnation, Jesus was mediator and priest. And this, of course, then, if it is so, it has an enormous consequence. What does that mean? It means that his priesthood bears a strongly Marian character. Of course, in the sense that he received, so to say, his priesthood, his priestly ordination, his garment, his anointing, his priestly stole in a spiritual way. Where? in the womb of the Virgin, who for this reason is called by the tradition the Holy of Holies, the temple of God, where the Son of God enters as the new and definitive high priest. It's beautiful. This thesis is, of course, also very much sustained, the sentencia by Cardinal Herbert Vaughan, when he says in another beautiful text, Mary has given us both the priest and the victim of our salvation. When the incarnate Word rested within her tabernacle, in the first moment of the hypostatic union, he was anointed priest by the Holy Ghost. This without the laying on of hands, the unction of oil, any human ceremony, but within the holiest and most glorious sanctuary ever reared for sacred rite or sacrifice, he became a priest forever in order to accomplish the work for which he had become incarnate. Mary was the noblest of temples within which a divine Son was anointed priest. Which, of course, is not an abstract idea out of touch with reality, but it's something that has, again, for us, all priests, a practical, concrete, spiritual consequence and significance. And Herbert Vaughan, in this light, recommends, especially to the young priests, look here, in my words, as Jesus started his priesthood in Mary, so should you. Start your priestly ministry and accomplish your priestly service in and through Mary, which you do most effectively by consecrating yourselves to her. And another beautiful text, which is so inspiring, so beautiful. Recommendation to young priests. If you have made no special consecration of yourself to Mary since the date of your ordination, hasten to do so now, and to do so with some preparation and solemnity. This should be done in the conviction that the priesthood has an interest, a charm, an attraction for Mary beyond every other profession or state of life, and that the infancy or early years of your sacerdotal life stand in special need of this Divine Mother's care. It can hardly be necessary to point out that a young priest will pass through a critical and dangerous period before he becomes consolidated in sacerdotal virtue, much more than a religious in his cloister living under the close observance of superiors does the young priest fresh from college need the steadying influence of this loving mother's care. Oh, so nice. Of course, Marian consecration has a long tradition in England, goes back at least to the 14th century. In 1399, Jeremy, you know it much better than myself, at the request of King Richard II, the then Archbishop Thomas Arundel, made a famous solemn consecration and proclamation that England is Our Lady's dowry, thank you. And that the English should excel all other nations in their Marian devotion. It's a beautiful, you all know this. Wilton Diptych, if you have never seen it, go before leaving for America or wherever you go back, go to the National Gallery in London. You find there, I hope it's still there, this little so-called Wilton Diptych. It used to be, wahrscheinlich, wie sagt man, probably it was used for the celebration of the Holy Mass, which depicts the consecration of England to Our Lady. So beautiful. In any case, I think Vaughan also in this respect was very much influenced by the French school of spirituality, especially by Grignon and his teaching on the Marian consecration. Cardinal Vaughan was convinced that the work of the Church is to be carried on by apostles and apostolic men, and that these are the bishops and priests of the Church. And yet he knew that besides priests, ministerial priests, there are other figures who share in the royal priesthood of Jesus, and these are the spiritual mothers. And I am very happy that there are here amazing sisters who are also spiritual mothers for priests. Of course, the first place here again belongs to Our Lady. And in Herbert Vaughan's book, there is about the priesthood, there is a chapter entitled Mother of the Priest, which, and inside there is a beautiful Mariological text. Allow me again to read it to you. It examines more closely the communion of the high priest with Jesus during their earthly life and mission. where Herbert Vaughan says, "From the first moment of his incarnation, from the beginning within his mother's womb, he stood forth as a priest and mediator between guilty men and defended majesty of God. In carrying out this great purpose, his chief solace and companion was to be Mary, his mother." She was near him, and now comes this explosion, important for Dr. Mark. She was near him during his passion and in her proper place by the side of the divine priest as he offered the divine victim upon the altar of the cross. Through her knowledge of the priest and his intentions, through her love and sympathy, the greatest possible for her divine Son, through close association, conjunction of her soul with his in the work of the redemption, she has obtained the singular and unique title of co-redemptrix. Therefore, an important text. Vaughan was convinced that Mary's role was not limited to giving birth physically to the Son of God, of course, but continued after this event and was realized and accomplished in the most intimate cooperation with Jesus, High Priest, in our redemption. And he sums up this Marian cooperation with the singular and unique title of co-redemptrix. Now, for this reason, he represents another important witness to the usage of this Marian soteriological category in the 19th century England. And it's very interesting because he takes it so much for granted, it doesn't bother at all to explain its meaning, free it from possible misunderstandings, or he doesn't even mention any other authority that may have used it before him. In any case, during the Cardinal's lifetime, this Marian title was used by a number in England, proposed and defended by a number of great personalities. Of course, in the first place by Newman, in his letter to Pusey, his main Mariological work, where he calls Mary co-redemptrix and a priestess, or a priestess. Normally, priestess is, when it's quoted, this text is omitted because it sounds very shocking from Newman. It needs explanation, not in the sacramental sense of the word, of course. Or, for example, by Manning, Cardinal Manning, who was Vaughan's mentor and friend, for whom such titles as mediatrix or co-redemptrix, quote, are not metaphors but truths. They are not metaphors. I would like to underline that. But truths, they are not the expression of purely oratorical or poetical ideas, but the expression of true and living relations existing between her and her divine Son, between her and us. In any case, I would say that co-redemption, mediation of Our Lady is seen by Herbert Vaughan above all as functions of her spiritual motherhood. She is co-redemptrix and mediatrix. Why? Because she's our mother, of course. It's so simple, a mystery. And even though it's universal, it extends to all people and nations, Herbert Vaughan sees it manifested primarily in the life of the priest, because he is addressing the priests, to whom he advises to embrace Mary as their personal mother. And in light of the episode in John 19:25-27, the Cardinal writes, again, beautiful text. Looking at his mother and the priest standing by her side, he said to her, "Behold thy son." And after that he said to the priest, "Behold thy mother." And from that hour the disciple took her to his own. It is precisely this that every young priest, fresh like the disciple John from his ordination, should do. He should take Mary, the mother of Jesus, to be his mother, and he should take her to his own home. If then you should be asked, young priest, with whom are you going to live? You should be able to answer at once, "No, with my mother." And whether your lot is to be in a London presbytery or under a tent in Central Africa, whether on home or foreign missions, take her to your own. At the same time, the Cardinal was well aware that Mary's spiritual motherhood is like the foundation of an ecclesial vocation proper to women, which has assumed a concrete shape in the figures of the so-called spiritual mothers who work, pray, offer up especially for the sanctification of priests. And In the annals of the church, there are such shining, beautiful examples of these priestly spiritual mothers. You all know them, but I just love pictures, and art. Monica for Augustine, or Scholastica for Saint Benedict, of course. Wasn't she a spiritual mother for her own brother? Of course she was. Or, do you know this one, English? This is, of course, Saint Friedswald. I think you pronounce her name like that, the patron saint of Oxford, who established a monastery in Oxford on the university site in the 8th century, long before the university came into being. Or, for example, Jeremy, help us, who is this? Julian of Norwich, of course, who was known and is known as Mother Julian, a spiritual mother for England. A beautiful book that she authored, The Showings of Divine Love, one of the greatest female English theologian, medieval theologian. Or, for example, of course, okay, it's from a movie, Saint Clare was such a spiritual mother for her spiritual father, of course, on many occasions. Or the Dominican Saint Catherine of Siena was such a mother for the Pope, wasn't she? No. From modern priestly, saintly figures, I would love to mention this one from France, who is venerable, Saint Louis Marguerite Claret de la Touche, who even wrote a book on the Sacred Heart and Priesthood. And when it came out, some bishops and priests said, no, this couldn't have been written by a woman. It was. And Jesus said the famous words are so beautiful. 19 centuries ago, 12 men changed the world. They were not merely men, but they were priests. Now once more, 12 priests could change the world, but they must be holy. And it is the spiritual mother's work and role. Like it could be a family mother to pray for the sanctification of priests because we need it so much. Or Maria Silla from Austria, from Steiermark and Graz. She died in 1952, a figure who is being made known more and more in conferences, like recently in Heiligenkreuz by Wien. They spoke about her, the Cistercians. In her writings were examined and approved by best Roman theologians of the time, like Garrigou Lagrange, of this Austrian mystic. And she has that big diary on spiritual motherhood, priesthood, where Jesus often tells her how important spiritual mothers are for the sanctification of priests. And if the priests are sanctified, then you can renew the church. The Lord said to her on many occasions, I want you to be a sacrifice for the priests. It sounds brutal. I'm not a big sacrificer myself. But often Jesus explains to her, sacrifice goes together with love. In German, Sühne muss immer mit Liebe zusammengehen. Expiation must always go together with love. Otherwise, you forget it. And I would love to, in the end, draw to your attention this document issued in 2007 by Vatican, the then Congregation for the Clergy, on the phenomenon of spiritual motherhood for the sanctification of priests. Some of you may have it. It's just so beautiful. Again, a number of examples. Father, I'm finishing now. Of these spiritual mothers. But there emerges above all who? The extraordinary figure of Elizabeth Vaughan, the mother of Cardinal Herbert Vaughan. And the document reports that this remarkable woman, after her marriage, she was a Protestant, she converted, she was from the Rolls-Royce family, very rich people, decided to make, and she married into the Vaughan family, aristocratic family. She decided then to make a holy hour every day before the Blessed Sacrament in the house chapel at Courtfield, in order to ask God to grant at least one of her children a religious vocation. And imagine, her prayers were answered in an amazing way. 6 of her 8 boys became priests. One of them a bishop, another an archbishop, and Herbert the eldest a cardinal. From her 5 daughters, 4 became nuns in religious orders. And there are some memoirs written about this woman by the family members that highlight her spiritual beauty, her love for God, her spirit of prayer and self-offering. And one of these portraits is given by Herbert Vaughan. Allow me at the end to read it. It's just so moving how her son describes her own mother, his own mother, as a spiritual mother. It's just so lovely. Something of the English romance, no? And beauty and excellence. She loved every book that treated of prayer. She used to buy every book she heard of on the subject for long years before her dear death. She used to talk to me about prayer, and I remember that I couldn't understand how it was that she was so charmed by what I considered so dry, and her language used to flow, and her countenance, beautiful as it always was, used to glow with what I now know was divine love. And during the daytime, she was often before the Blessed Sacrament every morning. Before breakfast, she was in the chapel for half an hour or 3/4. During breakfast, the conversation often turned on priests and their duties, on what there was to amend in them, so that I might see what I should have to shun and what to imitate. And we often used to laugh at her jokingly when she complained of want of zeal in chaplains, for there was often gross neglect among them, and to tell her that she saw too much from human nature. And she would say, I do not expect a St. Francis of Sales, I do not expect it, but if they would only care a little more for the poor people and go among them. Her love of God was intense and most affecting and devoted. She often spoke of the love of God and the wonders it could operate. After breakfast, an hour in the morning was always spent in meditation in the chapel, which was her real home. She generally knelt, slightly leaning her wrists against the prie-dieu. I do not recollect ever seeing her distracted on these occasions. She often remained with her eyes fixed on the tabernacle. Even in those days, I was much struck with my sweet mother's ardent love and devotion to the Blessed Sacrament. One more minute to close it. Cardinal Vaughan was profoundly convinced, quote, that the work of souls in England depends on the supernatural. And for this reason, he has such a high view of the priesthood, starting with the Trinity, foreknowing, knowledge of God, counsel of God, and therefore also a high supernatural vision of the woman. And in this light, it can be argued that the woman's participation in the priesthood of Jesus through charismatic, spiritual, and co-redemptive motherhood for the priests, rather than by assuming a specific ministerium pertaining essentially to the nature of man, is the most supernatural solution to the present-day discussion on the priesthood of women. It is only in this way that a non-competitive but fruitful, beautiful, constructive communion is created between priests and women, spiritual mothers within the Church, a communion which Herbert Vaughan describes with this beautiful, unique image when he says, the chalice, the ciborium, the tabernacle, the sanctuary belong in a special manner to the priest. By the old law of England, the care and repair of the sanctuary belonged to the priest, while that of the nave belonged to the laity. But they both construct the one church. This fittingly suggests that the ministerial priesthood, spiritual motherhood, represent two essential ways of participation in the royal priesthood of Jesus, and leads us back to the image of the early church depicted by Luke in the Acts. With one heart, all these apostles joined constantly in prayer, together with some women, including Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. Thank you very much.